I've been reading about the devastation caused by Storm Daniel, which hit the northern coast of Libya on Saturday night. As many as 20,000 people are feared to have died there, and rescue workers in Derna have appealed for more body bags after this crazy flood killed thousands of people and swept many out to sea. And now, literally, the sea is washing bodies up all the time in this town. And it is so inhumane to know that this is a natural occurring weather event that if you look at the science and rewind the clock, you'll see that we have caused it. This is a human-caused climate disaster. And it might not be sexy to talk about, and I know that people are not really interested in the phrase climate change or global warming or climate crisis. In fact, I would say that the United States has all but given up talking about it, whereas countries in Europe have put it at the very top of their political and cultural agendas. Just even knowing how to live a more environmentally friendly lifestyle, whether it be driving an electric car or recycling your plastics, or working from home even, not eating as much meat, just simple things like not running the tap when you're brushing your teeth, using less water, and being thoughtful about your climate impact, your carbon footprint, as we used to call it. And I feel like the fashion for this type of activism has become dissipated by all the other chaos, the surge of fascism and authoritarianism all around the world. Obviously, we've seen it in the United States with Donald Trump and his surrogates, but also, in Turkey with Erdogan, and in Belarus, and in Russia we know about, and China and North Korea, and, Hungary and Viktor Orban, who really is one of the kind of worst of these characters. Brazil had it with Jair Bolsonaro, and they managed to vote him out, and now he's shopping in Florida somewhere. These have been the distractions from the big issue. And the big issue to me is the fact that we have to look after our planet because it's the only place we have to live. And whilst, billionaires are doing space exploration and Elon Musk thinks that we should be living on Mars, that might not be the most stupid idea because we are blowing up this planet. And if you haven't noticed the extreme weather events getting worse, and if you haven't read the science that directly connects those weather events to human climate change, if you haven't looked at the graph and seen weather events over the last 1,000 years and then looked at the Industrial Revolution and seen how the graph changes the moment that we start using fossil fuels in industry and driving cars, then you're just stupid. It's like the science is not complicated. We have the technology to look at climate over thousands of years. And, I've heard people go, well, humans weren't around with thermometers to measure thousands of years ago. And I'm like, please, trust the science. Understand that it's not as simple as that. And it might be a subject that you are not an expert in, but we do have experts. And this desire to kind of rubbish expertise is also extremely frustrating to me because, we rely on people being really good at their jobs. This is why I never liked, these TV talent shows where you would sit and watch people being really terrible for weeks and weeks and weeks till they finally found one person that could sing. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I would rather watch a show with just the best professional singers from day one. And I don't want to see people fail. I want to see people succeed. And for me, we have so much expertise. And this is why during the pandemic, you had conspiracy theorists who were denying the expertise of really excellent scientists, and how when the worldwide pandemic came, Every scientist downed tools on the jobs they were working on and started working on COVID, on vaccines and learning about the virus. And still, people who didn't know any better came up with conspiracy theories and thought, well, there's no way you can come up with a vaccine that quickly. It must be a bioweapon designed to make everybody vote Democrat. You know, it's like, please have some respect for the fact that there are people out there who are smarter than the rest of us. And I've always had great respect for people who do science and do the kind of work that I do not have the head for. And I would never for a second pretend to know more than them because my opinion did not match what they had discovered through decades of analysis. So with climate change, this weird misunderstanding about collective responsibility, I find also very frustrating. And you know, we really all can make a change. We can do our bit. And all the propaganda that's put out there by energy companies saying that, you know, it's nothing to do with them. You know, these people have been paying for years for counter-research to try and convince people that fossil fuels are not the problem. And of course, anybody who lives in reality can see that they are. And the argument that electric cars are too expensive, well, that is not the case. You know, I bought an electric car on Craigslist for $4,000. And it's a 10-year-old car, and it's fantastic. You know, my point is, it is possible. You don't have to fall for the marketing of a brand new Tesla that costs 40 grand. You know, if you really care, you can make the effort to find another way of doing it, an alternative way. You know, you can build your own little solar panels for like $50 and charge your phone from it. You know, like small things, like start somewhere, but get into the mindset and educate your children to get into the mindset, because the extreme weather events are only going to get worse. And the story out of Libya, no matter what you think about Libya, of course, Libya has a bad name because of the Lockerbie bombing and, you know, various kind of terrorist issues over the years, but we still have human beings, people of the same race as you and I, who have now died and are floating back into shore because they have been killed by this extreme weather event. And, you know, think about the weather events that have been going on around the world and closer to home, especially. You know, and this year, January, it was the 6th warmest January on record, you know, averaging 35.2 degrees in the US. And due to the jet stream that spread warmer Pacific air over the whole country and high pressure that pushed storms west. And, you know, my point is that we have the science and we have the data to see how things have changed. The Midwest and the South experienced a string of tornadoes. 168 reports of tornadoes in the South just in January. February had an ice storm across Texas and the Midwest, freezing temperatures across the Northeast, extreme cold and unusually warm temperatures later on in February. Southern California saw winter storm conditions, inhibiting travel, and other parts of the country across the Southeast saw spring-like temperatures. It was insane. And, you know, what we used to know as seasons, spring and summer and fall and winter, have just disappeared. It's so changeable. You don't know what you're going to get from one week to the next. In March, we had Cyclone Freddy. It was massive, hitting Madagascar and Mozambique. And the storm made landfall for a second time in Mozambique. It lasted more than a month. It was the longest-lived tropical cyclone on record. It killed 400 people in Malawi and Mozambique, and injured thousands. And California in March, an atmospheric river, do you remember? It brought a bomb cyclone that left 2 people dead and more than 100,000 without power. Hurricane-level winds, 35 million people affected. The San Francisco Bay Area faced the most severe weather. And what frustrated me was watching the news and seeing reporters like holding their microphones, like, wearing their big coats, the water pounding them, and nobody mentioned climate change. They just kind of were getting excited about the weather like traditional storm chasers. And I couldn't understand why this was. I was thinking, is it some kind of political bias? Because, of course, climate change, tragically, in the US, unlike everywhere else, has been politicized. Is it because, Democrats were involved in first, making people aware of how our fossil fuel usage was affecting the climate, and then it became weaponized by the right? No, it turned out that the news agencies, the news channels that were owned by Republicans, invariably, sent diktat down from the top to say, don't mention climate change. It's not good for ratings. There was 200-mile-an-hour winds, an EF4 tornado rating for a tornado through the South in March. 25 people died in Mississippi, one person in Alabama. And yet the news isn't calling it climate change. How many people have to die? How many bodies need to be washed up on the shore before people are going to kind of join the dots on this and realize that this extreme weather is not going away and that it's only going to get worse? April had heat waves in Asia and the Mediterranean. Several countries, Bangladesh, India, Laos, Thailand, saw some of the highest temperatures on record, over 113 degrees Fahrenheit. In the Mediterranean, Spain and Morocco had record-breaking heat. And yet, I watched Fox, and they were like, well, it is the summer, when we were talking about this a few months ago. And it's like, it's not just the summer. There is science that goes with this. It's not just amateur meteorologists who wake up in the morning and look outside and go, oh, what a nice day, or it's a rainy day. There is data, there is science, there are devices to measure and analysis that is done, and we must respect that analysis. And then as the summer came, we saw wildfires raging in Alberta, Canada, reducing air quality all over the world. And sure, wildfires are common in the spring, but this was an unusually active start to the season, according to the NOAA. Smoke from the fires traveled to the US. Several states, Montana, Nebraska, Washington, Wisconsin, they all issued air quality warnings. And then we had Cyclone Mocha in Myanmar and Pakistan in the middle of the month. Hundreds were estimated to have been killed. Hundreds of thousands were left homeless. And these countries, many of them, don't have the infrastructure in place to deal with mass displacement. The days of, we'll put everybody in the local sports arena. It's not always possible. Those arenas fill up, and if people are not rehoused, then there is disease that spreads. And then we had Typhoon Mawar on Guam, widespread power outages, a Category 4 hurricane, one of the strongest to hit Guam in since forever. And then you may remember in June, the Canadian wildfires blew across the US, and the smoke was so bad that in New York, people couldn't see their hands in front of their faces. And then India had a massive heat wave that led to 170 deaths, power outages. It's not just a regular heat wave. It's the data. It's, temperatures were 4.5 centigrade above normal, right? It's a bit like, people don't understand. Even Donald Trump would say this, when he pulled the US out of the Paris Climate Accord. Couldn't get his head round this kind of 1.5 degrees of warming. It just didn't make any sense to him. He kept saying that he wanted the cleanest air and the cleanest water. That's not climate change. To have a president that doesn't know what it is, a president who gutted the Environmental Protection Agency. all of the protections that were in place to do something to help people, from the quality of drinking water to emissions from factories, he just gutted it. It's so painful to know that in the US, climate change has been politicized. And even now, Joe Biden is not really able to talk about it as freely as he would like to, because he needs to win as many votes as possible. He needs to bring over moderates and undecided voters. And if he talks about climate change, it's been so politicized that there's a chance he could lose votes because he's trying to save America from disaster. And let's not forget, the US is the second biggest polluter on the planet after China, because this sense of collective responsibility. And I swear it's going to get to a point where the only time you'll hear an electric car coming, you'll know it's a Democrat driving it, because Republicans have been brainwashed into thinking that electric vehicles are for Democrats, are woke vehicles. It's so stupid. It's cheaper to have an electric car. You don't need to get it serviced. It doesn't have any oil in it. It doesn't have an engine. It doesn't have transmission. It doesn't have any of those things that leak or overheat. It is literally 3 components. It doesn't break. It's a battery, an inverter, and an electric motor. That's it. They're all sealed. You're never going to have to pay for servicing. Just change the wiper fluid yourself. You see, and people don't talk about that. They're like, oh, the car is so expensive. You're never going to have to service it. You're never going to have to go to the gas station. And do what I did. Go find a used one, a 10-year-old car on Craigslist for a few $1,000s. It's totally possible, but unfortunately we're kind of forced to think that we have to part with money and then it becomes a political thing or a statement. None of this is necessary. Meanwhile, for every car that is on the road that is pumping out fumes into the atmosphere, catalytic converter or not, it is terrible for the atmosphere. Flying is terrible for the planet. It's terrible. You don't have to travel on business. You could do it on Zoom. People are, off the back of the pandemic, are starting to understand this, but it's so important that it becomes second nature when you're asked to travel to say, no, it's not good for the planet. Climate change has amplified India's monsoon season. It has changed weather patterns in countries that you would typically go to for sunshine. Various regions across the globe have experienced heat waves, including Europe, China, parts of the US, all magnified by El Nino and extremely warm oceans. And of course, El Nino has come much sooner this year. And what we were thinking, oh, well, climate change is, it's a way off. It's 2035. We're not going to start to see the effects of it until then. They were wrong. It's happening now. Every single disaster that we see around us, Maui, seeing this devastating wildfire, the Hawaiian island killed over 100 people, and experts blamed climate change for the destruction. They said when the air is hotter and it can hold more water vapor, and that means you get more water evaporating from plants and that dries them out. So the ground is dry. And when the infrastructure of electricity cables is not properly maintained because electricity companies want to make a profit, so they don't invest in fixing stuff, they don't turn off the electricity when they're told to, you get wildfires. It's all connected to climate change because the ground is so dry. In California, we've just had Tropical Storm Hillary, the first storm to hit the southern part of the state in 84 years. Nothing like it to have a tropical storm coming into California like that. All of us have a job to do, but I'm going to end up sitting here every week describing the tens of thousands of people that have been either displaced or killed because of climate change. The window for us to fix this is now minimal. We've got maybe 6 months to a year to kind of empower the world to come together and do something. I've talked about the Defense Production Act in the past. I would like, in an ideal world, the US president to ask all these companies that do other things to start building wind turbines and to start building solar farms and to power the entire country from clean and green energy. And tragically, phrases like the Green New Deal are they're like politicized swear words. It's more important than anything else. People fighting over pointless impeachments and crazy kind of political infighting whilst the planet is burning, and billionaires doing space flights in weird phallic-shaped rockets. We've really got it wrong, The very planet that we are walking on is dying, and it's our job to save its life. I'm Anthony Davis. You can hear me every day on the 5 Minute News podcast, on Wednesdays hosting Uncovered with Ron Filipkowski, and on Sundays on The Weekend Show with Midas Touch.